All right, the next phase of the game I want to get into is what I consider the early game. Now, the early game starts at Ascension level 1. So as stated earlier, once you hit 235, you transition out of the pre-game and you're into the early game. And in the early game, that is when you unlock your Ascension skill stat sheet. So I'm going to tell you right now, your Ascension level, which starts at level 1 and goes all the way to 9,999 or 10,000 for the most part, is going to be essential in building account stats. Every time a character on your account hits 235, they're going to have access to this Ascension stat pool. One way to approach Ascension is to get to 1700. Just EXP grind dungeons, repeatedly doing quests, make alternate characters so that you can get EXP to level up faster, and focus solely on getting to 1700 so that you can max out this entire right side of the Ascension stat pool, the vitality side, because these percentage stats are all going to add up and stack up, and they're going to be extremely important and moving into the next phase of the game, as well as even progressing through this current state of the game, which is the early game. And I want to emphasize that this is the early game because this is when you start to get into the rotation of how LaTale actually works now, which is a strong emphasis on dungeon crawling as you attain each set of levels. So when you open the guidebook, you can see that the dungeons are split off by level sets. And when you get to 235, you'll have access to 6 new Ascension dungeons that you can complete on a rotation on this character, as well as making some alternate characters, and that's all going to aid in leveling up your Ascension. I would recommend making 2 to 3 alternate characters to speed up that process. Also, every time you make a new character, they'll have access to a kill and loot quest, which you can run on each character to get EXP to level your Ascension even faster. And so getting to 1700 is one way to approach it. I would describe LaTale's early game as the area of the game where most players under level 5000 actually are and will likely quit because they are attempting things that they shouldn't be attempting. So if you made it beyond the pre-game and you got into the early game, you're a returning player or you're a new player, you're going to be introduced to a lot of concepts and a lot of walls that will feel impossible to get over. And it's really easy to get distracted by the idea of, I gotta get the in-game weapon, I gotta get the in-game piece of armor, and that's going to be my big difference. And I'm telling you, that is not going to be the big difference. It's going to be a waste of your time. It's going to be extremely stressful, and it's going to make you quit the game, because the early game has a specific focus of progression that isn't around completing in-game content. So some things you should not be focusing on in the early game is trying to get the best in-slot gear and trying to upgrade it to its maximum potential or enchant it to its maximum potential, because that is going to deter you from the game and make playing the game extremely unrewarding. This gear, although you may gain access to it, it's not meant for you to be focusing on, because the systems around it are focused on in-game players being kept as retainers to the game and having something to do for a long period of time between major updates. So do not get distracted by the shininess of in-game pieces of gear and trying to max them out, because you'll go, well, that enchant system is stupid and unaffordable, and why should I play the game if it's so hard to actually upgrade and complete? The thing is, you shouldn't be doing this anyway. So you're shooting yourself in the foot and you're jading your experience as a player of the game by attempting to focus on this content, which is irrelevant to you and does not benefit you very much. But for the most part, these days, we have access to something that is known as burning. You're going to see Ascension burning here on the side. You've already gone through my Ascension burning 1 through 235, and you'll already understand how the process works. But what's really important these days is that the Ascension burning from level 1 Ascension to 3000 has changed a lot. So when you come over to Toma, you're going to see that she has a set of quests for you that you wouldn't have had prior to 2023. And what's really important about these quests is that these quests actually set you up for what you need to be focusing on once you hit the early game. So the first thing you're going to see here is that she has a quest that gives you 5 champion points. Why is that important? Because when you open up your skills and you press the champion scroll, you're going to have a quest line for completing the scroll, and that quest line is going to give you access to the champions, which you'll actually be focusing on leveling up and getting some stats from, as well as having access to another full map attack, or not really full map attack, but a large scale attack that will help you with progressing faster as well. But the champions are really important because this is now another system that you need to be focusing on as you're progressing, right? And the thing about LaTale is that it isn't as linear as it used to be. You have access to all these systems at once because it gives you a lot to do while you're leveling up. So it doesn't feel like you're just solely focusing on EXP grinding in one facet, but you're getting stats and you are able to progress from a variety of different angles. So it's important that you follow the burning quest line because Toma is telling you what you need to be doing. She's telling you need to do your champion quest line so that you can start leveling your champion skills, and she's also giving you these points to aid you in actually leveling these things up faster. The next important quest that Toma has for you is one that focuses on killing Evil Iris, and it has the Evil Iris totem, which you get from burning already for free. It has some Tengu totem fragments, and it has Evil Iris totem material pouch. The reason this is extremely important is because in the early game, you're being introduced to the idea of long-term gear. So there's a couple forms of long-term gear in the game, but one of the earliest is the Evil Iris totem, which is a piece of gear that you would get from one of the 235 quests dungeons, which is the Cane of Chaos. And why it's attached to Cane of Chaos, that's all based on the lore of the game and if you follow the actual main quest line. But with this totem, you'll actually upgrade it until it evolves into its next totem, which will be the Dragon Valley totem, which is at Ascension 800. And that's really important because by the time you get to Ascension 800, you could have essentially done Cane of Chaos enough times, as well as some of your burning quests, to actually level up this totem and evolve it and start working on the next phase. There are a lot of players in the early game who I see running around. They're like Ascension 2000, Ascension 3000, because they're just running through the burning quest line and they're still running around with an Evil Iris totem. You are playing the game backwards, and what's going to happen is that you're going to end up getting to a wall and you're going to be like, yo, this dungeon is extremely hard, and that wall is likely going to be somewhere around the 1000 to 1800 range, and you're going to be like, yo, why is the game so hard? I can't get over any of these walls. And so part of that is that you've been ignoring some of the systems that you should have focused on in the pregame, and now you're continuing that habit and you're ignoring systems that you should be focusing on in the early game, like the Evil Iris totem. On the flip side of the Evil Iris totem is the Tengu totem, which I show you how to get in the burning 1 to 235 video. And the Tengu totem is primarily a cash item, but also it can be upgraded through events similar to Toma's event and a large variety of other events. You can even see it in the attendance event here, but those fragments are going to be important for upgrading this fashion item, which is going to give you some more stats, and you'll be using that on multiple characters as well. Next, she introduces the concept of gems, right? So because you're playing burning characters, which I recommend all people play at this point in the game, just to aid you, because the game can be extremely tedious and hard in the early phases without the burning set, which is cool if you really want to play the hardcore version of the game. There's no point because there's just so much more game to play. And so if you want to take a 2-year experience and make it a 5-year experience, that's on you. But looking at gems, you're going to start replacing your first row of gems, and Toma is telling you that by introducing to you the Hall of Rest Anubis gems, and she even gives you the gems maxed out, but you're going to replace those gems when you get over to Ascension 1000 and you get to Zarena's headquarters, and then you'll get some new gems there that will give you another damage boost, and that process also repeats itself every couple hundred levels in Ascension. So next is going to be the guild accessories. These are also really important, and why it's important to get a part of a guild or be a part of a guild that does daily guild crops if you're not a cash player for the most part, because these guild accessories are going to give you some very important stats in the ring section and on the banners, and those stats are going to be something you're going to progress long term. Those gear pieces will eventually evolve, and they use guild coins to do so. Sometimes there are flash sales or events in place, doesn't look like there are any right now, where you can get those guild coins. They're very common, and that just speeds up the progress of those pieces, but they can 100% be upgraded over time for free if you're a part of a guild. And if you're taking advantage of events, sometimes you even have guild coins in the attendance event, or when you do your event missions. Let's see, they have guild coins in here. No guild coins in here this time, but there are many ways to get them, and that's just another system you need to be focusing on as you are progressing up the levels. Next is going to be the weekly challenge. The weekly challenge is a new concept that's introduced to you when you start the early game, and the weekly challenge is going to be accessible when you speak to the 2 partner NPCs, and you will do this every week. Once a week you can do this, and the weekly challenge is going to give you a pendant which you can also level up long term, and it's going to give you more stats. You see the trend here. The game is going to keep introducing systems that can give you stats, and every single system is important. No one system is going to make you OP or make you ready for the next phase of the game. You need to be upgrading and focusing on every piece of gear and every system at all times. It is not linear. They all happen side by side. After that, Toma's going to introduce to you the concept of hard dungeons. So many of the level 200 EXP dungeons have hard dungeon variants. And before 2023, a lot of these dungeons would be impossible to play without having a large amount of accuracy that is now obtainable for early game because of the way the new burning system works, which I'll get to later on. But you're going to be doing these hard dungeons because the hard dungeons are going to introduce another piece of gear, which is going to be the Sky Eve 5th badge. And that badge is going to evolve at plus 30, and the badge evolves into the Mysterious Hall badge, and then that badge evolves into the Royal Garden badge, which evolves into the Rivera City Hall badge, which evolves into the Chunzik badge. And those badge pieces can only be dropped from the hard EXP version of their respective dungeons. Next, Toma is going to introduce to you the concept of Ely farming. It is extremely important to start working on getting your Ely gear set put together, right? And so when you open up your stats, you'll see that you have an Ely gain rate, and that Ely gain rate is going to be very low when you start the game off, but you can start crafting pieces of gear that have Ely gain rate on them, and you can also upgrade these pieces of gear and enchant these pieces of gear. They're primarily accessories, and then you can also start enchanting Ely on some of the specials. And you don't want to do this with your main set of gear. You want to have an Ely set of gear, but for the most part you can buy a lot of these things out of the auction house. But what's really important about Toma introducing this system to you is that there are treasure chests at the end of the Ely dungeons, which is important to know, because when you open up your guidebook and you go over to item Ely, you'll see there are a set of Ely dungeons, and as you enter the early game, which is 235, you'll have access to 2 Ascension Ely dungeons, and you can only do these once per account. But as you progress through Ascension, as you focus on leveling up or just progressing in general, you'll have access to more of these dungeons, and as you gain that access, you'll be able to get more Ely on a daily basis. And this is going to give you the ability to start saving up your Ely to start buying things that are really crucial to the account, whether you are a free-to-play player or a paid player. But for the most part, you want to start saving up your Ely so that you can start buying pets from the auction house from other players. You want to save up your Ely so that you can afford to do stat upgrades and gear upgrades. And it's just the most important form of currency in the game, because you can buy cash with Ely. So definitely start focusing on Ely and understanding that that's a part of your daily grind, something you want to do daily when you're playing the game. Next, Toma's going to introduce another side system, which is going to be the warehouse system, and the warehouse system is going to give you access to your 6 badge. Right now I have the level 20 badge, but the badges go up to level 55, I believe, right now. And that warehouse system is going to be something where you test how strong your character is day by day. The more warehouse rooms you can clear, the more you know how much stronger you're getting, or the more you can test if you're becoming more powerful. And the warehouse can be found when you go to the city of Midgard, or by directly going to Giendia Park, and you'll find the warehouse in that top left corner. Now, we focused on the quests that Toma has for us and the systems that she introduces, along with the pregame systems that are important to focus on. But I also want to talk about a couple of major changes that have happened in 2023. So in 2023, with the updated event system and the updated burning 3000 system, we're not going to talk about burning 5,000 today, but the upgraded burning 3000 system, you now have the ability to evolve your level 1 dark dragon gear. And this is extremely important and crucial, because Now that you can evolve your Dark Dragon gear to a new version, which is the advanced Dark Dragon gear, you're pretty much capable of skipping a large majority of the armor and accessory content in the game and focusing specifically on your weapons, your special slots down here, your fashion gear that we talked about, and all of your specials. And so you don't have to focus on armor anymore between level 1 and 3000. And that's important to know, because when you look at the dungeon list, when you get to 3000, you're going to actually enter your first in-game dungeon for the most part that you will swap your armor out for, which is Purgatory Azrael. And that's really important to know, because the advanced Dark Dragon's gear is stronger than all of the gear Ascension level 1 to 3000. And some people may think, well, doesn't that make the game easier, or doesn't that defeat the purpose of playing the game? No, not necessarily, because I've already broken down that there are a large amount of systems to be focusing on, and this just helps you not be overwhelmed. This also doesn't mean that the game is going to be ridiculously easy. It just means that it's going to be a smoother process to getting into what is the mid game of LaTale. So you'd want to actually make sure you upgrade all of this advanced Dark Dragon's gear, and you can do that with the Dark Dragon Awakening Stone. What's also extremely important to point out about this is that prior to this Ascension box, the Dark Dragon gear as well as the Burning Dark Dragon's gems were unstorageable. So now you can actually storage all of these pieces, the armor set, the accessory set, and the gems, and you can actually use these pieces of gear on your alt characters. That's extremely important, because before it was very hard for newer players or returning players to make alts, but now it should be extremely easy, because this advanced Dark Dragon's gear is also level 1. So level 1 to 235 is going to go way faster for you than it already is for your alts. And then once you get to Ascension, you can now focus on progressing in your levels, working on your other systems that need to be focused on, and just increasing your stats all around. And what's even crazy about this is that as a mid-game player who just came back to the game, I actually use advanced Dark Dragon armor and gear, and I'll show you that once I get to the mid-game section. So at this point in the early game discussion, all that's left to talk about is that as you are progressing through these dungeons and completing these burning quests from Ascension level 1 all the way to Ascension 3000, you want to make sure you are awakening your gear pieces so that you can get extra damage boosts. You want to make sure you are replacing your gear pieces with their next end slot by going to items, looking at special equipment, and just looking at which dungeons give you the next piece. And that's going to be a very big part of your loop, replacing these pieces and making them stronger, and getting new gems, finishing out your fashion specials, upgrading your long-term specials, as well as getting new charms from the next dungeon. What I do want to emphasize here, though, is that when it comes to weapons, specifically level 1 to 3000 weapons, I would recommend trying to enchant these weapons to at least 2 lines of 10 level 10 stats, just for that damage boost. It's going to benefit you. And for specials, if you have the resources, enchant them. But I don't necessarily think it's that important, more so than just upgrading your specials and getting them to their last phases. I also want to point out that the early game does not end just because you have access to all the dungeons in the game, right? That's an easy misconception, an easy way to look at the game and say, okay, well, I have access to all these dungeons, my early game is over. No, the early game is actually not over until you can run through every dungeon in the game on easy mode solo. If you cannot run through every dungeon in the game on easy mode solo, you are not out of the early game. And it's really important that I emphasize that, because what I think tends to happen is that a lot of players in the early game, let's say they finesse their way all the way to 5000, and they somehow get access to all the in-game gear from, maybe they bought it from the auction house, or you know, they get the in-game weapon, which you will find in Theater Yugaman, and they're like, okay, I'm at the next phase of the game. Why am I still having a hard time running through these dungeons? I have the in-game web. I'm spending all of my Ely trying to upgrade the in-game web, and it's not working out. And the reason this is happening is because you are skipping steps and you have not focused on your other systems of the game. You have not maxed out your reputations. You have not filled out your illustration book. You haven't been collecting pets by spending your Ely by buying pets from other players. You have not gotten all your summonables unlocked. You have not finished your champion skill, or you haven't awakened your character at level 1500. And so you're skipping all these steps, and now you're trying to do what an in-game player will be doing, which is just make the best in-slot piece of gear, and thinking that the best in-slot piece of gear is going to all of a sudden make your character extremely strong. Now, what I will say is getting access to these pieces of gear is going to be great for you, right? It's going to make you stronger. It's going to be beneficial. But what's really important to pay attention to when it comes to getting access to these things, opposed to focusing on them, is that in-game dungeons are not meant to be completed overnight. Progressing your gear and your stats that come from in-game dungeons is just going to be a big waste of time, and you're going to find yourself getting extremely frustrated because these systems are geared for players who have nothing else to do but focus on these pieces of gear. And they'll focus on these pieces of gear for months at a time because that's all they have to do, and for them it'll feel very rewarding as they make leaps and bounds. But for you, it may be a struggle because it's already hard for you to get the gear. Now you're getting it and wasting all your resources on it, and you're not getting rewarded for it. And even if you did get rewarded for it, you still wouldn't feel that big of a jump in progression because you're missing a lot of base stats and a lot of fundamental stats that your account needs. So on that note, let's go ahead and jump over to the mid game, which is where I would consider myself